Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. I am a little bit delayed on getting to my end of the year content just because of the busyness of the holidays and working New Year's Eve weekend and everything, but I don't know if you've been anticipating this video from me, but I've been anticipating making this video, and that is my favorite books of 2022. I read 84 books in the year of 2022, and there were obviously some standouts. I read a lot of books that I love, but there are a certain number of them that do just appear head and shoulders above the rest that are going to be memorable, that I absolutely adored. And so originally I wanted to do 22 books from 2022. But what I realized was I had a couple of rules, one of which was no rereads, and the other one of which was only one book per series. And so that actually it cut down my options quite a bit because I read a large number of books in a couple of series. So what I ended up doing was just not going for a certain number, just making my list with however I felt, and I broke one of my rules anyway, so we'll get to that. But basically there are 16 books on this list out of 84, and I'm just going to talk about them in the order that I read them because that is the easiest for me, and it is kind of how I break down my year in my head as well, like how things progressed and how I was feeling during each month. And some months were definitely better than others, but all of these books deserve recognition. They're also not all fantasy books. This is just straight up my favorite books of the year. And one thing you'll want to note before I start is that I didn't say only one book per author. All I did was only one book per series. So that's gonna come up. Now for book one, this was the year of Robin Hobb. It truly was. I read 8 of her books this year, and the one that I kicked off the year with, this was the very first book that I finished in 2022, is still one of my favorites of the year, and that is Royal Assassin, the second book in the Farseer trilogy. So at the beginning of 2022, I had only read Assassin's Apprentice, and now at the end of the year, I have finished the Tawny Man trilogy. So that is more than halfway through her Realm of the Elderlings, which is crazy to think about, but it really was a great year with her, and this is, in my opinion, the best of the Farseer trilogy. I, at this point, don't even remember what specifically happened in here that I loved so much, but based on the ending of this book, the way that this book brings you into Assassin's Quest and initiates the events that are going to end the series. I didn't love Assassin's Quest as much as Royal Assassin, even if I really appreciate what that series did and how it connects to the wider Realm of the Elderlings. Royal Assassin was the book where I was happy at points, I wanted to scream and cry and throw things at other points, and I know that not everyone loves that Hobb makes them feel that way, but I always think that if a book is able to get that much emotion from me, that's telling me that she's making me really, really care. And that is just it's some of the highest praise that I can give, really. Now, book 2 is ironically a book that I originally gave 4 stars upon finishing it, but this book has just stuck with me, and honestly, I should probably go back and change that rating upon reflection, but that is Nessie by Susanna Clark. And I think that really is the overriding factor in me choosing this as a favorite of the year, is that it just has stuck with me so much. Sometimes right upon finishing a book, well, all the time actually, you have that recency bias. You are physically unable to tell how you're going to feel about it after a long period of time, and sometimes you just don't know. And so this was one of those cases where, while I thought that the book was great and was fascinating immediately upon finishing it, I didn't have that anticipation of how much it was going to stay with me throughout the year and how highly I still think of this. And once again, I'm not going to say too much about it, but it's a short book. It's a very easy read, and so I would highly recommend this if you're interested in sort of gothic academia, I guess. Like Pierre Nessie, the main character, is an academic figure in the sense that he tries to catalog the mysterious world in which he is living, and he is a very interesting character, and I loved this. So I think I'll go back and give it 5 stars, but it's definitely a favorite of 2022. Next up, we have another book that I needed to choose from a series just to pick which one was my favorite, and that is The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden. Of course, props goes to the entire Winter Night trilogy, but I remember The Girl in the Tower being my favorite out of the 3, even though this was a trilogy that overall I absolutely adored. For this book specifically, I loved the way that it stayed faithful to the atmospheric, I guess, vibes that it had established in the first book, and it stayed true to the character as well while expanding the world and expanding her experiences, and basically just keeping everything that I loved, but making the plot bigger and getting more intrigue involved and more characters. And I just thought that this was a fantastic second entry in the series. And even though I love Winter of the Witch too, I just have to give The Girl in the Tower props for being my favorite from the trilogy. So next up, book number 4 is the first one on this list that I actually initially consumed via audiobook, and that is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I loved it enough that I bought a physical copy, so that's why I have this. But initially it was an audiobook from the Libby app, and I was absolutely entranced by this story. I was so interested. I loved the twist, if you want to call it that, basically just something that I wasn't anticipating going into the book. And I loved Evelyn Hugo as a character. I loved the discussions that this book had about fame and love and being ruthless, but when you look back and tell your own story, being honest about it and about your intentions and about the effects that your actions have on other people, even if you can't fix it. And even if you aren't necessarily sorry about some of the things that you've done, it was just a very cool voice. I loved the way that this was told. And it's still my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid book. I read Malibu Rising and it just didn't do it the way that this one did for me, but this has stuck with me for sure. And I understand why it's so popular and well loved. Now, next up for entry number 5 on this list is where I broke my own rules, but I think that in a way I didn't, because in my opinion, this series is one long book. And that is The Live Ship Traders by Robin Hobb. Honestly, gun to my head, I don't know if I could tell you which book in that series would actually be my favorite. It might be Mad Ship, but there's so much to love from every single one of them, and in contrast to what some other series do with their timelines and things like that, Live Ship genuinely rolls straight from book to book. You finish one of them and you're okay, yeah, we had a climax, we did have one, but stuff is still happening. And you start the next book and you're there has literally not been a break in the stuff happening. It keeps going. And so obviously it's 3 books, but at the same time, it genuinely is one long story in the way that some other series aren't, and I don't even, I think it makes sense. Tell me that that makes sense. But Live Ship is the best, honestly, probably my favorite thing that I read this entire year, and so I have a physical need to include the whole trilogy on this list, and so I'm doing it because my house, my rules, and Robin Hobb just deserves all the recognition. Now, switching gears for book number 6, we have Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaughey, and this is also one that I listened to on audio first and loved it enough to buy a physical copy of it. So this is a book that I picked up not really knowing anything about it. I had heard Charlotte McConaughey's name because I had heard of her other novel, Migrations, and I had heard the good things that people had to say about that one. But I had never heard of Once There Were Wolves. I was simply scrolling through the audiobook section of the Libby app again, and I saw it, and I read the synopsis on Goodreads, and I thought it sounded interesting. This is essentially like, I guess there's a new term called like climate fiction, and she definitely falls into that in both of her novels. And this is a main character who studies wolves and works with wolves, and her aim is to rewild wolves to the Scottish Highlands. And this is met with pushback from the local populations that wolves are dangerous to them, dangerous to their livestock, going to upset the ecosystem, etc. Even though the goal is to bring it back to a natural equilibrium of predator and prey that has been missing. And so this winds up being a little bit of a murder mystery where it's a question of whether the wolves are being set up to look like they have committed a murder. I mean, is it a murder if it's a wolf? I don't know. It's a philosophical question for you. Or is it a human that has committed this and is trying to make it look like the wolves did it in order to oppose this climate action in the form of the wolves? So I absolutely love Charlotte McConaughey's writing style, which I discovered upon first listening to this. I also loved the audiobook. It was super well done, but she is very atmospheric. Her books kind of have this melancholy to them, but her characters are very like headstrong and like almost like survivalist. Like they're very tough, they're very smart, and they are just very, very interesting and compelling to follow. And so I blew through this audiobook. This is like, I mean, it's one of my favorites of the year, obviously, that's why it's here, but this is one that I wasn't expecting to love so much when I picked it up, and it was like the ultimate pleasant surprise. The 7th book on this list is The Gathering Storm, the 12th book in the Wheel of Time, and this is the first of the Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson entries in the Wheel of Time. And so this was a tough one to pick just because the final 4 books of Wheel of Time all are very, very good and like are quite the step up from the slog books, and I really enjoyed myself with like starting with Knife of Dreams, book 11, and through to the end. I really, really enjoyed myself. But obviously I can't really say too much because of spoiler reasons, but The Gathering Storm just had some really, really standout moments for me, I guess. Like, I remember this really fondly. There's one scene in particular, and there's one character whose arc I was really impressed with and was like absolutely loving reading the development of that. And with Sanderson taking over in this book, it felt like a lot more progress was being made because of course he was tasked with wrapping up the series. Like, even though the path, I guess, was already set out for him, he actually had to accomplish that despite the widening that had taken place over the center of the series, and pulling it all back together was no small task for sure. And this one, honestly, like, I think I could have picked any of the last 4 books and made a case for it, but just based on vibes and how I'm feeling, I am picking The Gathering Storm as my favorite Wheel of Time book that I read this year. Book number 8 on my favorite books of 2022 is The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. And so this is a fascinating book and a fascinating series. I'm currently reading the 2nd book, and I'm absolutely adoring that as well. And like, this series is very, very intricate. And it is definitely the type of adult fantasy where there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of political intrigue, families, houses, names to remember, magic systems to remember, and it's not spoon-fed to you in the sense that things will be explained while they're happening, but they're not going to lay out the whole board for you. You're just going to see some of the pieces, and you, along with the characters, are kind of putting it together as you go. So the main synopsis for this is that we have Ren, a con artist who wants to infiltrate this noble family, basically just for the safety and security of having money. She wants to like take some of their money and run, I think, so that she's gonna have enough to live off of. But she inevitably gets like very entangled in her lies and the scheming of a lot of other people, and there are some really, really interesting characters in this book and in the series. And like, I don't know, if I had actually finished The Liar's Knot in 2022 instead of it holding over into 2023, it would have been a hard decision, because both of the books, at least so far, are so phenomenal. This is definitely like among my new favorite series, and I can't say enough good things about this author team and like what they've put together here, and just the like, there's so much to dive into. It's so compelling and it's so enjoyable. So absolutely 10 out of 10 recommend The Mask of Mirrors. Next up, book number 9 on this list is actually the only one that I don't have a physical copy of, and that is, well, I listened to it on audiobook initially, and that is Finley, Donovan is Killing It by Elle Cosimano. And the reason that I loved this one enough to buy it as well, along with a few of the others that we've seen, but the reason that I haven't is because I'm not entirely sure how I feel about having like the hardcovers or the paperbacks, or like, because the others were standalones where whatever book I bought for that, like, didn't have to worry about it matching anything else, like that type of thing. Whereas Finley Donovan is a series, so I'm worried about the availability of the books. Stupid discussion, not relevant to why it's my favorite, but Finley Donovan is Killing It is essentially about Finley, who is a kind of struggling author. Like, she is a published author, but she's struggling for an idea for her new book. She's also going through a divorce and doing her best to look after her kids and keep the lights on. And when she has a meeting with her agent, someone overhears them talking about the plot of her newest book, or one of her ideas for a plot, and basically thinks that she is a hit woman because she's talking about multiple ways that she could kill someone in the book, and tries to hire her. So someone basically offers her a lot of money to carry out an assassination, and it's honestly just like shenanigans from there, because like this is kind of a ridiculous book in a lot of ways, like the way the plot plays out, but the reason that it worked so well for me was that it was grounded in Finley's genuine like struggles, her relationship with trying to keep her children, the way that she feels about her ex-husband, and the fact that she wouldn't have ended that marriage. Like, she found out that her husband was cheating on her, her relationship with her friends, like, the characters are very much grounded emotionally, and I really, really enjoyed their relationships, and that made it, that made me care, I guess, about the plot we were following, and really, really rooting for Finley and wanting her to come out okay. And there's a whole lot going on. Like, the book is very funny. I loved the way everything played out, but I think that that's why it was a favorite and not just like simply an enjoyable ride that I then like forgot about afterwards. So next up, we have Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey, which of course I already talked about Once There Were Wolves, and a lot of the same things about Charlotte McConaughey's actual writing and like the emotions that she puts into her work can be said about this as well, and even the subject matter with it being climate fiction. But this one is about a woman named Franny who basically is a scientist and wants to follow the final migration of Arctic terns, which are birds. And this is climate fiction in the sense that, like, the fish in the oceans are basically drained dry, like a lot of animals are gone. The world is dealing with a reckoning of extinction, like mass extinction events, or I don't know if you can call it a mass extinction event. scientifically speaking, but that's essentially what it is. A lot of species are gone, and she needs to basically persuade her way onto a boat because otherwise she's gonna have no way to follow these birds. So she strikes up a relationship with a fishing boat where basically the birds will be able to lead them to fish if they allow her to track the birds. And I don't know, there's a lot more to the book than that, but that is your opening premise. And we find out that like Franny definitely has some dark emotional things in her past, and so do some of the other members of the crew. But like the appeal in these books for me, in Charlotte McConaughey's novels, is that emotional like investment that she's able to get, and the like atmosphere that she portrays, and the way that she writes about nature. There are so many cool aspects of it, and I have just like absolutely loved both of her books. So that is why they're both on this list from this year. Now, at some point during this video, you may have been thinking, well, Grace, you read a lot of Terry Pratchett this year. You basically read one Terry Pratchett book every single month. So are we gonna see him? And the answer is yes, but like I mentioned, only one book per series. And so I was making my way through the City Watch series, and by far my favorite is Night Watch, the 6th book. And so I read this in September, and Night Watch is the culmination of what came before it. Like, honestly, this could be the end of the City Watch series. I am not as interested in reading the final books. I did read Thud, but after me and Ben read this together, like, I don't see how you top this. Like, this is the ultimate culmination of a story about Vimes, a story about the city, how the city has evolved, like from the past to the present, but also throughout the series, like the time frame that we've been watching it in. And it's a story about, like, I don't know, family and like the watch itself. And there's just so much good stuff in here. Like, I loved this more than any of the others, and I've given a lot of them 5 stars anyway, but this just had that emotional impact that while some of the others have that in moments throughout the book, I feel like this one kind of had it the whole time and was building up to it and just paid off so well. So Night Watch is my favorite of the Terry Pratchett that I read this year. Next up, we have the first and only collection on the list, and that is The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories by Ken Liu. And this one, because it's a collection of stories, like, there's a lot to be said about each of them individually, but overall, like as a whole, the reason I loved this so much and was so impressed with it was, one, Ken Liu's writing, like his actual writing, but also his ability to, like, in such short form, like fiction, explore the themes that he wanted to explore and create an emotional impact in basically every single one of these stories. Like, he's exploring fantasy themes, or like fantasy concepts, but also sci-fi concepts in different stories. He explores a lot about relationships between the East and the West. He also explores some of the history of like Asian cultures and Asian countries, and a lot of that ends up intertwining with like Asian relations with the colonial West and stuff. And so it's just really, really interesting how he does a lot of these things, and he manages to balance it perfectly, like these wider, more abstract themes with like human characters and human emotions that really ground you in like what we're actually exploring. And then he'll combine it with like a fantasy element that makes a really, really cool story and is exploring a theme and like has that emotional impact. So I was just so impressed with the way that he brought it all together. Like, not in every single story, like there were some that I didn't like as much as the rest, but like on the whole, I was just like enamored with this collection, and so I'm really glad this is the first thing that I read from him, because I am planning to read the Dandelion Dynasty this year, and this was just like a sneak peek of what he can do, and it made me really excited. Next up, we have a new 2022 release that ironically deals with a lot of the same themes as the Paper Menagerie, and that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. And so I know that recently on the internet there was a bunch of interesting commentary on Babel and what it's trying to do. I don't get where the point got missed. This is such a masterful like exploration of the themes that R.F. Kuang was going for. I absolutely loved this. The discussions of translation and like race and colonialism and culture and language, like the magic system that she chose in this book, having to rest on the back of translation and relying on basically England using people from other cultures because they can speak those languages like a native speaker, is really like, it does so much to tie all the themes together perfectly. This theme of revolution and the necessity of violence, like that's the alternate title of this book, Babel or Necessity of Violence. And I just loved what she did here. It was so appropriate, I guess. Like, I will grant that the characters weren't necessarily as strong in here as in some other books that I've loved, and characters are generally a driving force for me enjoying a book, but the characters were good enough and interesting enough. It was just that they ended up being a vessel for the themes, and the themes were the centerpiece, so I didn't mind too much, and I thought she did so well at it. I do have a review for this. It's also kind of rambly, so if you're interested, you can go check that out, but yeah, Babel was amazing. Book 14 of my favorites is Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie, the second book in the original trilogy. Why was I going to say the Blade Itself trilogy? That's not what this is called. What's this called? The First Law trilogy. So I actually only read 2 Joe Abercrombie books this year, because The Blade Itself I had read in 2021, but I read Before They Are Hanged and then Last Argument of Kings in back-to-back months, and while both of those books were amazing, Before They Are Hanged just had like basically everything that I could possibly ask for in a fantasy book. Like, me personally, in terms of like being tailored to my tastes, because first of all, I am a huge sucker for like separate characters going on a quest together, like being forced together. And that is obviously one of the main plot lines of this book, because all of the main characters do that. Well, not all of them, but a bunch of them do that. And I was loving it, because I love that that usually comes with the forced dynamics between people, where they kind of grow into like, not a found family exactly, because it still is a Joe Abercrombie book, but like a damn sight closer to a found family than they were before they set out on the quest. And it also had like battles, it had a good dose of the like political machinations and the scheming and like the magic of this world, and it was just like, for me, a perfect combination of all of those things. And the ending was like, I'm not gonna say what the ending actually was, but in terms of the tone, I thought that it was perfect to like, I guess, take us into the finale of the series, because it was just unexpected and expected in ways. And I know that's like super vague, but that's the point. But yeah, Before They Are Hanged, definitely my favorite book from this first trilogy, and it was amazing. Now, definitely pivoting a bit here for book number 15, very different from an epic fantasy, is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. And so this was like, this was a crazy good memoir, in the sense that the way that Jeanette McCurdy writes is so personal and like raw, that like, I know that a lot of the blurbs and a lot of reviews say that this book is funny, and like, while I do find that Jeanette McCurdy writes with kind of like a dry wit, I did not find this funny. I found it like heartbreaking. And I know that she is like self-aware of a lot of the things in here, and she tries to present them in that kind of like dry humor tone. And like, I do agree that that is present, but I didn't find it like funny, if that makes sense. Like I really felt for her, and I was rooting for her and was in like pain listening to some of the experiences that she was relating in here. I would definitely recommend knowing going in that this could have major triggers for eating disorders. So that is a huge like consideration in my opinion before reading this, how you think that you personally would react to it. But if you think that you can read it, I definitely think that you should read it. I admire her for being so honest in this, and I think that she relates some experiences that are remarkable, but others that the underlying feelings are things that a lot of people can relate to. And I just think that like the way that she wrote this, the way that she delivered it was incredible, phenomenal. So I would definitely recommend this, even though I know that like half the world has already read it, but I still would. Finally, we have the last big fantasy book of the year that I finished, and we are like in very appropriate fashion beginning the year and ending the year with Madame Hob. So this is Fool's Fate, the final book in the Tawny Man trilogy, and like the farther you get into the realm of the Elderlings, the less you can say about plot, but this is like, I don't think it's a spoiler to say, no, I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say who the book is about. It's a person, it's a character, but this trilogy was amazing. I think that I enjoyed The Golden Fool while I was reading it, but in hindsight, in comparison to Fool's Fate, the 1 and 3 books, like Fool's Errand and Fool's Fate, are definitely the standouts of this series for me, and I think that Fool's Fate takes the place as my favorite by merit of being the concluding volume and the fact that there was so much good resolution and falling action in this book. Like, we had the climax, and then after that we got to deal with the consequences, we got to have some emotional resolutions, and we really just got to like sit in some relationships and experience them, and I loved that part of it. And to be fair, Fool's Errand has some of that as well, because it starts very slow to like, I guess, get you back into the world, and Fool's Errand felt very comfy, like slipping back into like a warm bed or coming home, and I loved that. But yeah, Fool's Fate just had such an amazing plot, so many amazing character moments, and so many cool implications for the realm of the Elderlings going forward. And like, Robin Hobb obviously is the standout of this year, because I put 5 of her books on this list, technically 3, but you know, live ship traders. But I just love her so much. Like, I'm so looking forward to continuing on, and I'm looking forward to eventually rereading these series. She's a phenomenal writer. So like, if you can handle some heavier emotional stuff and you have not read Hob yet and you're a fantasy reader, you just should, because she's so good. That's all I have to say. Okay, so with that said, I know that this video is gonna be like super long, but those are all of my favorite books from the year of 2022. I think that I had an amazing reading year. Like, I am so happy that I got to experience these books, and I'm just hoping that 2023 can come close to that in terms of experience. Like, Live Ship Traders and Tawny Man and like The Rook and Rose and finishing Wheel of Time, like, it's been a year. It's been quite the year, but I'm looking forward to rereading some of these. I'm looking forward to starting some new stuff, and hopefully I can continue just loving what I'm reading. But I had to wax poetic a little bit about some of these, which is why this video is so long, because I'm incapable of not talking a lot. But I hope that you enjoyed this. Let me know like if you agree with some of the books on this list. If you have a few standout books of the year that you want to share with me in the comments, I would love to hear them, especially if they are like recommendations for things you think I would like as well. I would love to talk to you about that. So please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you would like to see more content from me. I post new videos on most Mondays and Thursdays, and as always, I will have my socials and Discord linked in the description if you're interested in any of that stuff. And with that said, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!